Hey, in this video, we're going to introduce this concept of maneuver warfare. And this really comes about this idea of how do you fight outnumbered and win? In most every scenario that we as the U.S. Army are going to find ourselves in, we're always going to most likely be the away team, and we're most likely always going to be outnumbered. Now, knowing that, the question that you have to wrestle with was, well, how do we fight outnumbered and win? Now, we've introduced John Boyd and his OODA loop in the previous video. If you haven't, maybe would check that out, and again, look at other videos out there. Where we have come to is really trying to become disciples and proselyte maneuver warfare theory. Now, maneuver warfare theory to me is incredibly fascinating. It's something I've stumbled upon, and the more I've learned about, the more I realize, the less I know. I describe it as like a cavern that I've gone into, and you see all these great stalactites and this amazingness, and you see tunnels that lead off the different directions. And I want to, just to explore them all. And as I go to, down the one tunnel, and it even opens up to even a bigger cavern, and then I want to explore more. But I've realized in the back of my mind, I still have those others that I haven't gotten to. That's what this journey's been about, because maneuver warfare can apply to all aspects of life. And how do you fight outnumbered and win? How do you put yourself in an advantage? And again, it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking. Most people don't do it, I think, because it's hard. It requires a lot of effort, intellectual effort, and it's not easy. And since most people take the direct approach, most people take the easy route, most people just go from A to B, and they just kind of smear their way through life. This doesn't really, tend to appeal to a lot of folks. But I'm going to try and make it as simplistic as I possibly can. Now, maneuver warfare is how the Army would like to fight. It's how we preach we fight, but we just don't do it. We are constantly drawn in culturally to attrition warfare, to body counts, frontal fire, a lot of bombs and a lot of firepower, blow them all, kill them all out, and we stay away. There's no real effort in order to maneuver. Now, we say it, but nobody really does it. And as I've talked to my officers here in the Dark Rifles, one thing that we find over and over and over again is explaining maneuver warfare to them. They've heard these concepts preached, IOBC, Captain's Career Course, but they haven't. They just don't really know what it is, because we've just lost that art of what maneuver warfare is. So what maneuver warfare is, again, it is a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking of how you fight outnumbered and win. It's fighting unfair. It's the kick in the groin. It's the jab to the eyes. It is the way of using movement and using thinking and all to fight, to get to that place where you hit the other guy as hard as you can, as quick as you can, where it hurts him the most, where he least expects it. Now, it sounds easy, almost like fortune cookie type philosophy there, but you have to understand that is the goal of all of it, and it's a way of thinking about things. So a lot of ways is, as I've talked about, most people, they think about life like this, the direct approach. When they talk to people, they talk the direct approach. When they do an operation, they find the direct approach. If they're going to move things, they take the direct approach. Everything about it is the direct approach. They want a raise at work. Boss, I want a raise. Direct approach. You maybe want your significant other to be healthy and lose weight. Hey, significant other, you're fat. You need to lose weight. Direct approach. And what you're going to find over and over and over and over, the direct approach doesn't work. Doesn't work. There's a book written by Liddell Hart who introduces the indirect approach. And he basically says that throughout this whole book. It's about that thick if you want to read it, giving example after example after example historically that the direct approach just doesn't work. It creates, a massive amount of casualties, and you lose and you don't win. Cite World War I as an example. So a good question to think about it is, why professionally do we just go after the direct approach, the direct approach, the direct approach in everything we do? Not the purpose of our video, but maybe something to consider as you're thinking about this. The maneuver warfare is the idea of the indirect approach. It is how do you get people to come to the conclusion you want and making it their idea. How do you get your boss to give you the raise where he thinks about it's his idea to give you the raise? How do you get your significant other to to persuade them to come to the conclusion you want them to, where it's their idea. It is taking the road that's less traveled, that might take longer, a little more bumpier, but in the end, it gets to that position of advantage. Again, it's a philosophy. It's everything. It applies to every aspect of your life, maneuver warfare. And that's where I find it so fascinating. And then again, a few people are able to do it because, again, it takes a lifetime of effort and lifetime of discipleship in order to become good at maneuver warfare. So really, in order to enter, there's 3 key filters that you talk about when you do maneuver warfare. So these filters, and that's what I'm using William Lynn's Maneuver Warfare Handbook. It kind of talks about what maneuver warfare is and then how you kind of put it in practice. So there's 3 ideas or 3 filters when you have to send your ideas through. So the first, we call it commander's intent. Commander's intent is based on this idea that 2 levels above you, where they can see the entire context of the situation, understanding what they need to have happen, but then realizing at the point of action where it's actually occurring, you need decisions made at that level. So what I mean by that is often the opposite of commander's intent is commander directing. Think of the chess master who's sitting there and directing every single move at his level. That would be the opposite. Commander's intent is meant to be that 2 levels up, and why 2 levels up? Because at 2 levels, that person is able to see the entire context. He gives you what needs to happen in order to win. And then empowering subordinate leaders who will most likely be at the point of action to take action there where the circumstances are always changing, always evolving. I use my analogy of the wrestling match. So notice if I was wrestling my opponent, he's standing here, and I notice and I see his left leg standing forward, and I think I can go for a Russian single, but then I turn to my coach and say, Coach, hey, I notice his left leg is forward. I think I should use a Russian single. What do you think? The coach who's off the mat looks at it and goes, yes, use a Russian single at this moment. What do you think of the likelihood that my opponent's left leg is still there and he paused in space for me to go through that whole sequence and then launch that? What's probably happened is he's already grabbed me, thrown me down, and I've lost the match. Because circumstances change rapidly. Now imagine for a moment I'm wrestling, but my coach isn't on the mat. Imagine my coach is at his house and I have to stop and send a text message to him. Imagine then my coach is out shopping and this big long time delay is occurring. So what we're trying to grapple and what this is getting after is that this idea that decision making should be made the closest at the point of action, and the person on the mat doing the wrestling should feel empowered that he sees that something occurs, he can immediately take action. Now why that's hard to do is because typically, remember our video on lure and trap of tunnel vision. The wrestler was locked in and he only sees what's happening in front of him, and he's only making actions or taking actions that applies to what's happening right here. So therefore he loses context, and some of the actions he's taking might not be appropriate to the overall goal. And you'll see this where a lot of times junior leaders, they'll take actions and thinking they're helping, but they're actually losing the war. So a lot of times leaders will, because it's risky to allow subordinate leaders to make decisions, won't allow that, and so they become puppet masters and they control every action. Understand the risk of it is the time problem. That if you lose that decision making, like John Boyd talked about, you're not operating in the loop because it is maximized if the wrestler on the mat is empowered to take actions as the circumstances involve, knowing that the overall intent of his coach is for him to win. So that is as simple as I can talk about what is commander's intent. The second filter is surfaces and gaps. Surfaces and gaps are this idea. Basically, surfaces are hard, strong, fortified. Gaps are weak, vulnerable, and soft. So once you understand the overall intent, the effort is to find and to attack with everything you've got gaps rather than surfaces. That sounds easy, but nobody can do it. What I mean is, typically our culture is once you start getting shot at from some direction, there's no effort to find, hey, where they're vulnerable or to bypass or whatever. We will just immediately send everything that way. Almost like in the movie Ghostbusters when you see Ray, when he goes, get her, and they just rush the ghost. Kind of that whole mentality. I see it over and over and over again. We have the tendency to find strong points and we throw everything at it like moths to the flame. So though you might know this idea that, hey, avoid strong points and fortified positions, attack weaknesses, you got to do it. And you got to practice it. And you got to understand sometimes that means bounding back and on and on and on. But once you understand what winning means, the commander, and now you've decentralized decision making at the point of action, the next philosophy you have to adopt is this idea of surfaces and gaps. You find what's hard and avoid it, or you fix it and you keep it in place, and then you search for what is weak and you send everything there. So that brings us to our third filter, which we call the main effort aimed at the decisive point. Now there's a word that you'll see a lot of times called Schwerpunkt. That typically the thrust point or the point of action, right? The main effort. Keep out of the German world, we'll say, main effort, decisive point. What this means is once you understand what winning is, the commander's intent, you've decentralized decision making to its lowest level so you can take advantage of John Boyd's OODA loop. You're operating in the decision cycle because you've pushed decision making to the point of action. Then you've got the philosophy of finding hard places and weak places and then going at weak places. Then you have to get to what we call the decisive point. Think of this, the best way of explaining to me the decisive point is think of you're in a, the battle's over, you're sitting there around the campfire, you're talking to your buddies about, hey, how we won, and you're talking, you tell your one friend, you say, I knew we had them when we did this or accomplished this. That is usually the decisive point. Spoiler alert, it's usually behind somebody. Once you decide what the decisive point is, then you make that your main effort. And this is where it gets hard, because people cannot ever seem to make a main effort. It's risky, and it requires character to hold to decisions. You pick somebody to be the main effort, and you resource them with everything you can, and to get them to the decisive point. And this is ideally done if it's aimed through the gap. So these three ideas of commander's intent, surfaces and gaps, three filters of commander's intent, surfaces and gaps, and main effort is kind of the guiding principles of trying to operationalize or to practice maneuver warfare. In our next video, we'll go further into the mechanisms of defeat: preemption, dislocation, and disruption. All right, hunt, race, kill.